Dr. Ahluwalia, I want to start by asking you about, your initiation with Dr. Manmohan Singh and how you got to know him. Because I saw with great pride he narrated the story of how he plucked you out of what you were doing, brought you into government service. So what was it about the man? Because he seems to have been quite a talent magnet of sorts. Rakesh Mohan, yourself, the likes of Raghuram Rajan, so many others, leaving what they were doing, coming into government service. To explain, what was it about him, what was it that he was trying to do, which made you feel that, okay, I want to give up what I'm doing and join him and be a part of this?
Well, let me speak for myself. I mean, I first met Dr. Manmohan Singh practically 50 years ago in 1973. And I did that because I was here in Delhi and she wasn't then my wife, but we were about to get married. Her head of department in Khalsa College, Mr. Udham Singh, when she was teaching there, he invited her and me to dinner to meet Dr. Manmohan Singh. Sorry, I think this must have been 1970 actually, not 73. So that's how far back I go. And since then I was meeting him periodically. He was the one who actually motivated and inspired me to apply for the job of economic advisor when it fell vacant in the Ministry of Finance. So when I moved to the ministry, I always wanted to go back to work in the government, but this opportunity came up. And then, since then I'd had various opportunities to work with Dr. Manmohan Singh. I was privileged that he included me in his core team in the finance ministry by bringing me there from commerce as Secretary Finance. And later on, when he became Prime Minister, he asked me to join him as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission. So I had two long stints of close working with Dr. Singh, once as Secretary Economic Affairs and Finance Secretary in the early 90s, and then in the 2004 to 2014 period as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission.
When he was Chief Economic Advisor, when he was Secretary in the government, when he was in the Planning Commission, when he was Governor of the RBI, give our viewers some insights into what, according to you, made Dr. Manmohan Singh special in terms of his economic abilities, his understanding of the technical nuances of macroeconomics, and his ability to implement ideas from the classroom in the real world?
Well, look, there's no doubt that he was a person of very high academic achievement, so his technical competence is not in doubt. I think he was also a person who very gentle in approach and not at all authoritative, but he believed a lot in consulting people. I think he would work very well with people of very different personalities. And during his position as civil servant, that would be a very important thing, because if you're not able to work with other people, you're not really going to have much effect. Now, when he was a civil servant, I mean, obviously, he was working within the constraints of the policy that existed then, but I'm pretty sure that whenever he got a chance, he was moving the policy in the right direction. And I think he also, he didn't just go with the tide. I recall on one occasion, I wasn't there, but he told me about it, and it's well known to those who are familiar, that in the 1970s, when there was a sharp rise in prices, early 70s, and there was a movement, there was a pressure from the Planning Commission that if you want to control inflation, maybe you want to nationalize the wheat trade. Because in those days, many economists thought that a rather simple way of controlling inflation is just to control price. And there was a meeting, he told me, where Mrs. Gandhi, as the Prime Minister, was presiding. She was very concerned about the high levels of inflation. And the Planning Commission people were saying that, look, the high level of inflation is really the high level of food prices, and we can bring this under control by nationalizing the wheat trade and thus keeping a lid on the wheat price. And Dr. Manmohan Singh disagreed with this quite rightly. And he took the view that, look, if you really want to bring down inflation, you have to apply tight monetary controls. And he recommended that, you should do that, stricter availability of money, reduce a few benefits here and there, tighten expenditure, and so on. And Mr. Gandhi asked him that, look, do you really think if I do this, which was very different from what the Planning Commission was saying. So she asked him, do you think if I do this, inflation will come down? And he said, absolutely, madam. Within 1 year, inflation will be brought down. And so she was faced with two different choices. I mean, in economics, it's wrong to think that when you define a problem, there's only one way of achieving the result. You have to hear different views. And this was a classic case where one lot said impose price controls, and another person said that is not going to work. You have to tighten up money supply and reduce demand, aggregate demand. Well, she opted for the choice that he offered. And it's on record that a year later, prices were actually lower. There was negative inflation for a brief period. So, I mean, his advice was taken, and he was giving this advice against the view of more senior people in the Planning Commission. He was only chief economic advisor. And I think that actually gave Mrs. Gandhi a very high opinion of Dr. Singh as a technocrat. And I think it obviously led to his further advancement in subsequent years. So very early in the day, I think he was generally a very gentle person. He was always willing to work with others. He would take their different points of view. But I think he would put across what he had to say very firmly. It's not as if he just went with the tide because he's a civil servant. And of course, later on, when he became finance minister, I mean, that's when you can really judge effectiveness. I think when he was finance minister, he was faced with a crisis. I think it's to the credit of Mr. Narasimha Rao that he picked him. Given that he was made the finance minister, he worked out with Mr. Narasimha Rao that, look, it's going to take a lot of tough actions if you're really going to bring this crisis under control. And I think he was basically saying to the finance prime minister that, look, you have to back me, otherwise it won't work. And one of the first things there was devaluing the rupee. The crisis was such that any sensible economist at that time would have said, you should devalue the rupee. But there was very strong resistance to devaluing the rupee. I mean, for some odd reason, not just in India, people are very reluctant to see a weakening in the currency. So he persuaded the prime minister to devalue the rupee. The prime minister insisted that we should do it in 2 steps so that we test the market, as it were. Dr. Singh agreed because that's what the prime minister wanted. But then they went ahead and quickly did it in 2 steps and introduced many other reforms to bring the fiscal situation under control.